Hi, I'm Kelly from newbornposing.com. Throughout this video, I'm going to share with you some tips and tricks on how to fix problematic areas that should have been captured better in camera. I'm working with 6 photographs that have been handed over from members of my Facebook community, so I hope you enjoy and get something out of it. Make sure you are subscribed and hit the bell as well so you can see my latest videos. So when I first sort of have a look at the color temperature here on my screen, I'm just going to bring that down a little bit and look at the difference. And even at around 5,600, it still looks good to me. It's still nice and warm, it's not cold. So you've done a good job there. All right, so I'm going to open that image in a second, but I'm just going to go through the others in Camera Raw and have a look at those first, and then we'll go through each image separately. All right, so I'm actually going to warm this one up just a little here. And when we are working with white and we want images to be nice and white, sometimes we don't want to warm them up too much, but we don't want them to look cold either. You want to create a beautiful sort of feel to the image, and sometimes that sort of, you know, that nice warm ambience that you get in a photo does that. Alrighty, a little pink, so we'll just bring those magentas down, and I kind of like it around here, yeah. And we've got a little bit of red issues going on here in this photo, which we'll address, so you can see all those reds and yellows there, and we've got a beautiful blue background, so we'll focus on sort of keeping that around that 5,500 because some of those red tones. Now, another thing that I will often do in Camera Raw, and as well with the bright image, you know, I sort of look at the histogram and have a look at that exposure and where I can possibly bring back some of my highlights or increase some of my shadows, just depending on that capture. But here, I'm going to guess that a lot of that overexposed area within the image there where you can see the information of the histogram just hitting the end is going to be in that window behind her, because it is the brightest part of the image. You know, looking at her face, her arms, that's not overexposed. So sometimes when you are creating a very high key image like this, it can be hard not to completely overexpose that background, but yeah, we'll have a look at that when we open that up as well. But here we do have an image that is quite dark, and the actual comment was, you know, the pictures are usually quite underexposed because they're afraid of the highlights. And this is where having that histogram up on the back of your camera is so important. That's going to tell you, you know, if you've exposed your photos right. I teach it in getting it right in camera. I go over and over and over the histogram and to help you get your photos exposed right so that you don't overexpose your highlights and that you don't underexpose your image and end up with, you know, sort of quite dark, muddy areas and poor skin tone. Because when we look here at the histogram, a lot of that information is sitting down here. So if we think about the histogram, can they all see the, okay, so we've got, I can't see what you can see, I'm sorry. You've got your highlights, you know, over to your right, you've got your shadows down to your left, and so where you place the information that you're capturing within that histogram is going to tell you if you have got that exposure right. So skin tones, they should be up here, not down here. If this is black and this is white, you know, a baby with creamy, lighter skin tones should be sitting up here. A baby with darker skin tones should be sitting somewhere, you know, in the middle. And then a baby with very dark skin tones should be sitting further down. But you've got to know where you want that information to sit within your histogram. So that's why I teach that, because it's really important in terms of getting it right so that you don't have to try and fix those issues in post-production. But if I want to bring up, you know, my exposure here, I can, you know, if I had problems with highlights, I could bring those down. If I want to bring up some shadows, I can. And let's leave it about there, and while we open that up in Photoshop. And you know what? If you work in Lightroom, that's fine. You do you. Okay, so we've gone through all of these. I forgot to mention this one here. I'm going to remove the little hand, supporting hand. This image, we're going to work on that line. That was an issue for the photographer. And we'll have a look at a couple of other things. This one, more so those skin tones and the background, and then this one again. All right. Let's open those. And you know what? If you guys have got any questions, pop them into the comments. Garrett's there. He's ready. Michelle's here. She's also here in case I forget my words.
You would never forget your words. Didn't you win an award for talking underwater?
All right. Okay. So we'll go back down here to this little one. And like I said, the skin tones, you know, captured really quite well. The direction of light's good. Probably with this image, if I can make a quick comment about the direction of that light, you can see here how it's hitting the and if I paint, yep, you can see where it's hitting the blanket there, and it's quite dark over here. So that's telling me your light is too low. So you need to lift that light up a little higher so you can get a more even spread of light across your backdrop. The other thing, hang on, let me just bring up my history. And my histograms there, great. So yeah, when you are directing that light, yes, you do want it to come down across that baby's face, but you also have to look at the rest of the scene, I suppose, the composition, your image, and create a more even light there. So lift up a little higher, probably bring it around just a tad further as well, maybe 10 centimeters. Okay, when it comes to a background like this, where you've got that clamp, this is where, you know, getting your backgrounds set up properly and positioning that baby so that you've got lots of background to work with is going to really help you. Obviously, getting that, you know, in before you've captured that shot right is going to save you a lot of time. But in post-production, you can fix it. You've got amazing tools like Content Aware. I can copy information, I can paste it. A lot of people paint colors, solid colors into backgrounds. I'm not a big fan of that. I used to do it all the time, a long time ago, but the more I've learned about editing and the more I've learned about Photoshop and image quality and how to retain, you know, the best information within your images and get the best print quality as well, for me, is really important. So let's just say, for example, I did want to paint in the background. If I painted it in at a solid color, it would be very hard to match it because the background is lighter at the top and it's darker down here at the side. So for example, if I selected that color and I painted that in, it's not going to blend very well. Plus, by painting a backdrop, painting the backdrop in like that, I'm actually adding like a foreign object to the image. It's not actual part of the photograph. So the quality of that information is not going to be the same as the quality of information that was captured in camera in terms of the pixel quality. When you do this and you start to you know, have problems then with blending it, this is where you're going to introduce banding. You're going to see it in your prints and things like that, and you're just not going to have you know, all of that amazing quality that you need to get the best prints or the best images for that matter, especially when you're displaying them on different social media platforms. All right, so let's undo that because we don't want to do that. Like I said, you could use Content Aware, but for me, I often like to use the information that's already there within the file. And I'll often use the lasso tool to create new layers of information, and I'll feather that to make that edge nice and soft. Create a copy layer, Command J, Command T, and I'll just move it sort of up a little bit, and I can increase the size if I need to. And you're going to find that this is how you'll blend that information so much better. So you can then continue to do this. And you can see how it's going to change tone when I move it over because of the way that the light is falling off. So what you can do in that instance is then go into curves with that layer and then bring that information to help blend it better into the background. So I'm doing this really quickly, but that's how I fix my backgrounds. Another thing to look at here is I'm just going to create a copy layer of the base image, the background. You can see where the baby is positioned, and there's a lot of information in the bottom of the frame here. So what you can do is take that layer into transform. Let's rotate that baby, lift that baby's head up a little higher and bring him down further in the frame. Then you've got more information behind the baby. So when you're capturing that photograph, remember, you can move that camera, you can rotate it, you can tilt it up and down to position that baby within your frame exactly where you want them. So to give yourself more background here, you know, you can bring that baby down. It's got all that little bit of hair up there we can get rid of. And then you can crop the image slightly different as well. Does that make sense? Mm. Garrett's nodding. He's watching the screen.
I get mesmerised.
And you know what? The beautiful thing about Photoshop is that there's so many different ways to do things. Now I'm just removing that hard edge here with a soft brush so I can blend it a little better, and you can see I've come off that foot there. And then I can bring the opacity of the brush down so I can blend it a bit better over here. I can go back to painting that foot back in where I've taken it off, and I can take the background layer off to see where I've missed. And remember, I'm going very fast, but I teach all of this in my tutorials. So if you want to know more and more detail, you can go and look at all of the different tutorials that I teach. There's even free editing with actions tutorials that you'll learn a heap from. So yeah, up here, you know, and then you can change the positioning of your layers. Down here where I've got the baby, I can bring this in and start to introduce all of this. But you'll notice now I'm getting more solid tones, so this is where I can start to work with these layers and blend them a little better. Turning layers on and off really does help. But you can see to do this the right way, you need time. But when you get it right in camera, you don't have to do this, and you very rarely have to fix your blankets. So now I'm just up here, and what's my opacity at? About 34%, so I can just take that layer back off there, blend that a bit, and then just kind of keep working it to get that opacity right there. All right, so once you get it to a point where you're happy with it, then you can start to kind of come in with your patch tool and fix some of those areas that you want to get rid of. So if I, you know, take a snapshot here, and I might want to merge all those layers. Now I've got my base to work with, create another copy layer, come in with my patch tool, and I can start to remove some of these areas so that I get that nice blended background. I probably would crop out this bottom dark corner if I was. I don't really like to crop my photographs too much in Photoshop because it's removing a lot of information. You know, you're going to really reduce the size of your image. So when we start to look at other photographs like this one that's been captured, I'm not quite sure what lens, but there's a lot of information around the baby. If you want to make the baby bigger in the frame, you'd have to crop the photograph, therefore removing a lot of the information around the outside, reducing the file size. All right, so here, for example, if I was going to crop this image, I would probably kind of just have a look at where he was balanced there within the frame. Try not to get him too close to the bottom of the frame, but leave enough image space around him so that it's got room to breathe. You don't want to crop in too tight. like this and cut through the arm, because then having bits and pieces of limbs touching the edge of the frame will definitely lead your eye away from, you know, that main center of the image. But you've done a really great job with styling. I love the pose. Your lighting's almost there. And yeah, just have a look at where you place the baby on the posing bag. And you should already know, if you're going to pose the baby like this, where your camera angle is, so that you know how much background space you need behind the baby, so you don't have to worry about filling it in later. But let's have a little look. We'll take a snapshot at before and after. Got before and after. And we've got lots of information there, and we're going to have very little banding and issues because we've not introduced anything foreign into our photo by painting our backdrops.
This is amazing. I think people are absolutely loving this. We've got over 150 people
Whoa.
watching today.
Hi.
Lots of lovely comments, but Lauren in Texas, she's been looking forward to this live all day.
Oh, I hope you're not suffering too bad from that freezing weather over there, Lauren. Honestly, it looks
scary, isn't it?
Really scary.
Really
and
scary.
That accident on the freeway over there, that was on our news here. Okay. This image here, I really like, you know, the simplicity of this. It's got a really clean look to it. So I think you've done a great job with that. The line at the bottom of the floor that you seem to be having an issue with. Now, when you are removing things like that, like this is quite an obvious line, so it's distracting, it's pulling your eye away. You wouldn't want to remove it completely though, because you've got a line up here. So unless you remove the entire architrave, you know, you're not going to create anything seamless. But I don't think you need to create something that's seamless. You do have a lot of space here. So if, for example, I used the patch tool and I came in and I grabbed that sort of shadow and I went up and around like that, if I did this, it's going to sort of create a bit of a blurry sort of result. And if I even reduced, if I go up to, where am I going? I will, because once you click off it, the selection, you can't, the option to fade the patch selection actually goes. So let's do it again. Let's go back a step. Now, if I was to go, you know, edit, fade patch selection, and I bring that down, it's still going to create, let's just reduce that. So it has improved it, but it's quite a big gap. If it was a shorter gap, that actually would work quite well. But because this is a big gap between the floor and that architrave, this is where I would actually have to be a little bit more constructive with what I do here. So what I would actually do, I'll zoom out just a bit more so I can get the other side too, is I'm going to just select with my lasso tool. I'm a bit wonky today, sorry. I'm going to select that entire bottom section there. I'll just give it a quick feather. I'm going to create a copy layer, Command J, Command T, and this is where I'm going to bring back the opacity of this layer so I can see the background underneath. And I'm going to just move that layer down. I may have to rotate it slightly to get that line right. But I'm looking at the shadow underneath, so just bringing that opacity down a little more. So where it's going to look quite natural and still have somewhat of a shadow. So if we go down a bit more, now what I might do is just give it a slight little rotate. And other people are going to have different ideas on how to do this too. So just because I'm doing it this way doesn't mean, you know, someone else would do it this way. But my brain just instantly went to, I need to reduce the size of that gap. And this is the way that I know how to do it. So I'm just going to make it a little bigger there. And I can nudge it. All right. So now I'm going to bring the opacity of that up. Obviously I've done some damage there with the foot, but what I'm going to do is add a mask, and I'm going to invert it. Now I've removed that layer from the background, so I'm going to paint it on to where I want it to be. I'm having a look. So now I can come in. I may need to just increase the hardness of the edge of my brush as I come down. So this could be a bit fiddly, but I've basically just extended that architrave down, and I'm just showing you very quickly how you would paint that back in. And then if you wanted to reduce that darkness there, just flicking back and forth between a black and a white brush to sort of, and then changing the opacity of your brush will help you refine that edge so much more, so you get it just right. But yeah, if you find that you paint on too much, you just come in a little closer to that edge with that brush. But yeah, changing the size of your brush, the opacity of the brush, and the firmness of the edge will help when it comes to, really sort of improving the details. And when I'm entering print competitions and things like that, every pixel, I come around. And if you've got a little area, I've lost my brush, there it is. If you've got a little area like this, you might just have to come in and then clone that once you've finished doing the majority of that area. But that's what all of these tools are for, and they're great to work with. So you can see before and after, and now it looks more realistic. It looks like a proper architrave sitting on the floor. Even down here where there's a little bit of a light leak. Having a look there. But yeah, I find sometimes when I'm using the clone tool that because of where light falls, it's very hard to keep that consistency. And if there's texture or pattern, you can end up with very, very repetitive sort of cloning results throughout an image. So that's why I always like to work with the information that's already there and not create any repetitive cloning, especially in backgrounds and things like that, because even when I'm judging competitions, they stand out. I look at every area of the image. So yeah, that's what I would do to reduce that. I hope that helped.
I think it does. Adele loves it.
Oh, fantastic.
She thinks it's the coolest trick ever, by the sounds of it. Thank you so much, Kelly Graham.
All right. This face, I'm serious. When I open this photo, it's like, oh my God, those cheeks. That is the cutest baby. All right, so baby is a little off center when I'm doing a setup like this. You can see how the baby's face is actually sort of pointing in this direction. Therefore, I would have more negative space on this side of the baby, not over here away from the direction that the baby's well, it's not looking, but pointed in. So always try to remember, with composition, you want the eye to lead around the image. So we've got a lot of useless information over here to the left-hand side of the baby. So this is where, I could move the baby over. Command J, create a copy layer, move that baby over, and add some more space over here. But I'd have to get rid of the arm first. So we are going to do that. Now, I can grab this information over here, flip it and paste it over here because the light across the background is really quite even. Had the light, and I love actually how the light's coming across the front of the baby, I think you've done a really great job there. But had the light have been, coming in behind the baby and had lit the background on one side, then I would have had the same problem that I did with the very first image in terms of fixing the background, and I'm definitely not going to paint this at all. So the first thing I need to do with the hand is create some information that I can bring across, but over here we've got a few issues with the lines in the blanket and stuff. It's not a big area, so I could actually just patch that because there's information over here that I can copy it to. I'm probably talking really fast for people who aren't familiar with some of these tools, but let's just have a little play here for a second because I'm always looking for the quickest way to do things. All right. And I am going to remove some of this information over here. I just want some space here that I can use to bring over. All right. Okay, so I've got enough there to copy over. But the first thing that I noticed with this was where the finger comes in to the side of the head. So I could, you know, paint the background from the opposite side of the image in here, but I'm still going to have this issue where the fingertip is. And cloning it because of the texture in the lace is going to be really tricky. So my go-to would again be the lasso tool. What I'm going to do is then have a look at the difference in the tone, the light that's hit the background down below the finger and then above the finger. So it could be a little tricky to get it to work, but let's have a little go. So I've got enough information there. I'm going to feather that, and I'm going to create a copy layer and bring it across. Now, because it's a curve, getting it to match up can be a little tricky. So you can kind of see here where it is. So just bringing the opacity of that down, getting that lined up, and then what I can do is right click on that selection, come down to warp, and now I can kind of just bend that information so that it fits that curve a little better. All right. So it is a little darker up here at the top. I could lighten that, or I could darken this area here. So there's a couple of different ways that you can do that. You know, I could use the gradient tool. I could put my brush onto multiply and paint onto that selection, but I didn't copy enough information across to really get the tip of that finger there because there wasn't a lot down there. But I went with the lighter tone because it's, you know, easier to darken that down a little bit than it is to sort of lighten up the other area. But what I could do is I could merge both of those if I wanted to, but I'm not actually, hang on one moment. I'm going to bring the opacity of my brush down to about 15, and I'm going to come up to just multiply here, and I'm going to choose that color tone, and then I'm just going to bring the opacity down a little bit more, and then darken it so that it sort of blends in a little bit better. All right, so now I can merge both of those together, and I could use the patch tool here to just fix up that little bit of detail. And then I might fade that just a bit. All right, so now I've got my bonnet edge, and now I just need to replace the hand. So like I said, there's a few different ways that you could try and clone it out, and there's not a lot of texture in the background, and the light's pretty even, but it would take you a while. So the quickest, easiest way is just to kind of grab some of this information over here, feather it, and bring it over. But you're going to see that, and this is where you could lighten it to blend it. If the light was slightly different, you know, you can flip it, things like that. But the light's pretty even over there at the moment. So let's try and lighten it, see what happens. All right, so where that hand is underneath there, I can keep sort of playing with the size of that because I'm going to add a layer mask now. And I'm going to reduce got to bring my brush mode back to normal. And at about 30% here, with my black brush, I'm just going to help blend that in a bit. So I've got a more sort of even tone there. Take it off the baby's head. Sorry, I often go quite quiet when I am doing this.
I was just actually in a bit of a trance there watching you do it. But you're like the process that you're going through at the moment. Like, you know, I can see that there's slightly different texture and that sort of thing. But you're obviously thinking ahead when you're doing this sort of stuff, like the treatment that you're going to put on the background and those sorts of things. Like,
yeah, well,
what happens in that
the
sort of
texture's
process?
actually not too bad. Like when you look at it, there's a beautiful fall off that's been captured in camera. So this information's there. There's no texture there. When I come across, there's no texture there. Down here, we're starting to get a little bit of texture, but when I'm editing, I'll often soften the edge of my frame anyway, so that I've not got too much texture on the outside of the frame that draw your eye away from the baby either. Okay. So there's sort of a few things that I look for. But if I was going to center the baby now in my frame, you know, I could crop it. That would be easy. It's actually quite a wide image here. Let's just have a little look. So when I'm obviously working with, you know, my images, I'm at a 2:3 ratio here. So when I'm working with the placement of them in the frame at a normal ratio, that's perfect placement of the baby in the center of the frame there. So you wouldn't, when you're creating prints for your clients and so forth, you really do want to sort of stick with those standard, you know, print sizes.
Michelle has actually put a link to a blog post about aspect ratios.
Look at that though.
Oh,
and
so good.
When I'm working with backgrounds that have got lines like this in them, you know, I'll often use my go-to dodging and burning, hang on, that's not my folder that I want to open, my 50% grey layer, and this is how I'll sort of come in and I'll use it as a really low opacity, and this is part of my bland to brilliant on newborn posing. So at the moment, make that a white brush, with these darker areas I just want to lighten them. So you might have to change the, hang on, I've got a hard brush, opacity of your brush. But coming in, and I'm doing this real quick because we're going to run out of time, but lighten those lines. And you can already see just by doing that, you're sort of reducing the visibility. But you can perfect that and get rid of all of those lines very easily. And I can come up here and fix some of those areas. And then where it's lighter, you just go to the darker brush and you darken down the lighter areas. And then you create a nice seamless, but that's where you've got to make sure when you're putting that backdrop up, pull it tight, really think about, you know, your shot in advance and what you're going to have to do later. And I know sometimes we're always so focused on the baby, we forget about all those little things. But when you pick up that camera and you're looking through your viewfinder, you've got to look at your subject, the placement, your composition. You've got to look at your camera angle. You've got to look at your foreground, your middle ground, your background. There's so much that you've got to take into consideration, and it comes with practice. But trying to reduce your workload in camera is always going to benefit you. But yeah, we've got before and after. All right. Look at this voice. So another one with background. And one thing that's going to really help you is a longer focal length. I haven't looked at the details of the images, the raw files of what they were shot with, but when you are shooting with a wide angle, you're taking in a lot more information. So if you use a longer focal length, you can move back just a little bit, but you're going to, you're, I've lost words. Your longer focal length is going to focus on this much information. The wider the lens, the more information you take in. So when you've got a longer focal length, it's shooting a lot straighter in front of you, and it's not taking in, all your background behind you. That's a really easy way to explain it. Not technically correct.
Visually, it looks great.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so the main issue with this one, I think, was just the skin tones. And again, this is going to be your exposure in camera. At the moment, the light is a little flat and it's probably a little underexposed. If we have a look over here, the information's kind of sitting in the middle of that histogram. So you really do want to bring up that exposure. When you get your skin tones placed within the histogram, where they should be, they're going to look like they should. Red tones usually are quite prominent in underexposed images, and then the more you try to remove those red tones, the less natural your skin tones look. Alrighty, obviously I've got a heap of actions. Then my quick fix actions are probably the best ones when it comes to working with reds in skin tones. And babies have little blotchy areas like these little stalk marks and things like that. There's many different ways that you can fix them. But for me, I've got obviously years of doing reds with babies, and creating actions that I know work based on what we have to shoot is what it's all about. So I've got reduce red more and lighten skin reds. When I do lighten skin reds, it's quite sort of standard. I'll take my brush up to 100%, and you can see just in the background there, I'm reducing some of those reds already here in the foreground. This little baby's got some jaundice, so you can see those yellow tones. And adjusting the opacity of your brush depending on the baby is also going to really benefit you. But if I go over, this one's quite red, so we'll do it at 100 just to show you. You've got some red fingers down in here. Now when you do reduce reds, you introduce cooler tones. So sometimes you might, just to even those skin tones up, you might have to warm them up just a little bit in some areas. But we'll go around and we'll bring that down for the face. Some of the redder areas. You can see I'm just focusing purely on the issues. We got any questions?
None coming through at the moment.
Everybody just watching?
Everyone's watching. I think they're all a little bit in like that whole mesmerised sort of stage, really.
It's kind of cool watching someone else edit and go, oh,
but
that's how they do it.
I've always found it interesting with skin tones when you talk about warm. Warm is a more flattering, more cool tones. But like I always kind of assumed that red was a warm tone, but it's not a flattering tone.
And it depends on the red too.
Yeah.
Like if it's a very sort of dark magenta-y red, that's not great. And you'll find that's in a lot of these sort of stalk marks on babies, it'll be a different red tone. And that's why when I'm working with red skin tones, my actions have been created based on that. And then sometimes I might have a baby and their red tones are slightly off and I've got to do it manually.
Julie Maines has asked, where can she purchase your actions?
I think Michelle's actually put a link there, but if you just go to newbornposing.com and go to editing. Okay, so I've done that, and now let's take a little snapshot, and we've got before and after. And then the reduce reds more. So this is one, if I paint it on at 100%, that's only, sorry, at 67%, you can really see the difference there.
Wow.
But what I'm going to do is bring that down, because this is where I like to come in with a lower opacity and work on some of those more sort of problematic areas.
Macy Carr's brought up a good point. This is her absolute favourite action set, but it's not just for newborns.
No, I use it for everything
It's
too.
for everything. It's for photos, actually. Lauren has mentioned here, this is her baby. Very red, very yellow at birth. All three of their kiddos were the same. So,
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, every baby's so different with their skin tones. Like, I mean, it's funny, we live near the Gold Coast here in Australia. And I used to have a lot of clients come up from the Gold Coast, and it's funny because Mum would go and have a beautiful spray tan, and then she'd turn up for her photo shoot, and the baby would be so fair with sort of very cool magenta tones. So to take the beautiful photo of Mum and baby, I've got a purple baby and I've got an orange mum. Bit hard to work with, but you know,
That's an
do
action
it.
set in itself called
Yeah.
Gold Coast, isn't it?
Oh dear.
Sorry. Okay,
I used to live
Danielle
there.
does have a question though. Can you explain why you do a snapshot, please, Kelly?
Oh, just to go back and forth, and I'm showing you, but Michelle's got a really great blog post on snapshots, and you should read it. Hey?
You've got a very good memory.
While I'm scrambling.
No, snapshots are a great way to go back and forth and have a look at what you've done. And sometimes, especially, you know, when you're still learning Photoshop, you know, you can go back steps because it doesn't always save all of your history. Okay, so you can see I'm just working my way around these tones, and I do it very gradually to make it even. So you've got before, after.
Cindy's just asked, are you using a soft brush for the face?
Yeah, so you can see the hardness is off there, so it blends better. You don't see those
action's
lines.
being applied at, what's that, 24%?
Yeah, that's at about 24%, but every baby's different, so you just got to change your opacity according, but you've got to keep sort of going over the areas to get it to work. But as you can see, there's still some red tones and stuff in here, so it's just a matter of going back around and having a look, turning your layers on and off to see where you've missed, using your backslash key, your guide, and trying to even out those skin tones as much as you possibly can. But when I'm sort of doing this, and then obviously there's yellow tones in here, then I want to reduce my yellow tones too. So this is where I will come in here, and I'm just going to keep it at 25%, and I'm going to go over some of those yellow areas to kind of bring those down a little. Okay, so you can see it's very subtle, but it makes a huge difference. And then when you've got cooler tones, so I've got blues, just going to play the reduced blues up here on the forehead where it was a little darker in those reds, and we reduced a little bit there. At a low opacity, you can come in and you can warm up some of those cooler tones.
Macy Carr has asked, do you go over the hair when the baby has a really red scalp?
Yes,
It
I do.
changes the colour. What's the
But
best way to do it?
the thing is, it's a bit hard when you've got a baby with beautiful golden hair like this too, because when you reduce those reds, you reduce the gold. But that's where you might be a little bit more selective, and you could do it manually. So for example, you know, going up into hue and saturation, and then coming down, let's go to the opposite of red, which is our cyans, and I can come in here and I can have a look at those red tones. It's going to be a bit more selective with that type of red that I want to reduce. So if the baby's got a purpley red scalp in some areas but it's got golden hair, you do that, and that way you're not kind of messing too much with those more sort of beautiful goldy tones. But yeah, so I'd obviously fix the background, but that's how I would continue to work with a baby's skin that was blotchy and thinking, and yeah, so look better, much better, and then warming up those fingertips as well.
That's such a big difference.
But yeah, but that's why, you know, I've got lighten, darken, fix all the different colors. I've got, you know, the reducing the reds, because they're my go-to for skin editing, so I get that beautiful flawless skin. And you know, people use lots of different techniques, but this is the way I do it. So I find it's the fastest way, and we're getting there with time, so I am very wary of this. All right, this image was really underexposed in camera, and there's a lot of information around it, so try to get that focal length right. I shoot with a 24-70 lens. A lot of people shoot with 35mm lenses, 50mm lenses. That's fine, but just understand your focal length and how it's capturing the image in front of you. So there's also a blog post on lenses. There's a video on my YouTube channel about lenses. Go and watch it and understand focal length and how it can impact your image. Alrighty, so here I love the colors that you've used. I think your posing's really beautiful. You've got this little teeny tiny smirk on the baby, but get that exposure right in camera, because the original image was really very, very dark, and it's very hard to work with information when there's not a lot there. So if we bring up that, oops, oopsie.
Somebody did mention earlier with dark images, like when you're lifting that exposure up in post, how do you deal with like the grain and that sort of thing?
And that's the thing.
Tricky.
So I'll often shoot with quite a high ISO because, I mean, I like natural light. I've got lots of natural light here. I use strobe. I use continuous light. That's okay. Sometimes I want to get a beautiful quick portrait of my kids and I'll use natural light. But I'm looking at the back of my camera. So if I've underexposed my image and I've got a high ISO, even at around, you know, 800 ISO, if I start to lift that information in post-production, I'm going to start to see a lot of noise in the shadows and grain throughout my image, because when you increase your ISO, remember that you are sacrificing the quality of your file so that the camera can let more light in low light conditions. That's what it does. So that's why you want to try and have a lower ISO, but our cameras today are freaking amazing. Like, they really are. ISO in my, like if I was to take a photo with the same settings with my original 5D, with my 5DS, I'm going to see a big difference. And like, as they've just brought out new cameras, they just continually improve the file quality. So at the moment I can see here, you know, I did increase the exposure in Camera Raw, and I will always do that. But I'm looking at the histogram, and I'll just reduce the size. But if we hold the Option key in, and I can see, look at where there's very little detail. So that's giving me a little guide as to where I don't have a lot of information to work with. Shadows, it's not, you know, as bad if you're working with really dark sort of backgrounds like navies and blacks and dark greys and things like that, because you're going to have darker areas. But here you've got this beautiful flocati and you've got a lovely red wrap. So you want to try not to reduce the quality of the information in your image here. But your skin tones at the moment, if I have a little look here, I've increased them. So they're sitting around sort of here. These are your skin tones. If I bring the little eyedropper down here, now we're starting to go sort of down towards the darker end of the image. And over here onto the side of the baby's face. Like, that's where that information is sitting on your histogram. You really should have your skin tones moved up. To do it in post-production, if you want to increase your skin tones, you know, I can sort of have a look here and gauge that the majority of the information is going to be around here. I'm going to lift it. All right, that's a global. You can do this with an adjustment layer. I'm going to add a layer mask. I could use my light in action, but I'm just showing you when you're looking at where that information is sitting. Now with my brush at about 25%, I can start to bring up some of those darker areas. But this might be, in terms of your exposure, I'm not sure what your settings were or your lighting conditions, but if you're using strobe, you know, have a look at your output, your light output, have a look at the placement of your light, your modifier, all of those things, so that you can get the best results.
Got a question here about your skin softening actions.
Mhm.
When you're using those actions, when do you use blotchy versus when do you use soft baby skin? Like, what is
I
the
only
difference
really,
between them?
yeah, so the
Yeah.
blotchy one, it just works a little bit more with texture and tone, but I generally usually only work with the soft baby skin, and I'll use the blotchy when I want to smooth a little more. So let's just say if I'm working with babies that have, like I don't know, their skin's a little bit more textured. It's not necessarily too flaky, but sometimes babies, can be a little cooked. Or if I'm working with, areas on the arm or the bottom where the skin tones are a little blotchy, things like that. Or if I'm working with some fabrics, I love that action for different fabrics. I'll often paint it over dad's shirt if it's not completely ironed or mum's dress, because it actually still leaves, it doesn't make it look blurry. It leaves texture in it, but it just smooths it out a little more and so forth. But yeah, the best thing to do with most actions is just play with them and see what they do, so that you know when you look at an image, that'll work. But yeah, I'm just sort of like fluffing around there to lift those skin tones a bit more. And you notice that it actually improves the colour as well when you lift those skin tones. But you do have to be careful when they're too underexposed. But yeah, I'd use my reds now to sort of bring that up a little bit. But please don't be afraid of highlights. Watch the histogram on the back of your camera and get that exposure right. And do a test. Put your hand out in front of your camera with the same intensity and direction of light and get an exposure if your skin tones are similar to the baby's, things like that.
I think from like being at your workshops and that sort of thing, one of the things that a lot of people rely on is the actual preview that they're seeing on the back of the camera rather than that histogram. And I know that that's like your number one. Don't look at the image. Look at the histogram.
Yeah, the image on the back of your screen is, I've actually had 4 ladies, I think it was, and they all had the exact same camera, same model, and they all brought up their little histogram, their little thumbnails in the back of their camera, and they all looked different. So they're never going to give you an accurate representation of what your image is. It's great to have the little thumbnail there to look at your composition and all of that, or I might need to get a better camera angle, but ultimately that exposure is more important than everything else. And don't be in a hurry, be patient when you're shooting. Slow and calm. All right, so this image here, what did we have? I didn't know that this was a composite, but it was a head swap of mum's face. I think, yes. Okay, so not sure about the skin tones dodging and burning. I don't tend to dodge and burn a lot of skin unless I absolutely have to. If I'm working with my 50% grey layer, I'm literally working pixel by pixel to even out skin tone and improve the overall look of it. So with this, I mean, this woman has beautiful skin. Like, I don't think I'd need to dodge and burn here. What I would do, and I'm not going to composite it, but I'm just going to open these images up as they are, just to sort of talk you through what I would actually do here. So if we were to bring, look at that squishy face, were to bring mum's face over into the other image, then, and pretend that we've done that, I mean, I love the placement here. I find that the baby posing wise is probably just a little bit low. So when you get that shoulder up and mum's head's coming down, it just means you've got to position that baby up a little higher on mum's shoulder so that she can rest the head. So what I like to do when I am positioning mum is to get that hand up. You can see her hand is down here. It's below her shoulder. You got to get that hand right up on that collarbone as high as she can. And then that way you can get that head up there and you can get that arm down and relaxed because she's looking really quite tense. But the baby's kind of squished in there because it is too low and she's kind of holding it up like that. So get that pose right and it will definitely help. And with that baby being down quite low, the light is coming in and it's hitting here and it's missing the baby's face. So getting that head up nice and high on that collarbone will help that baby's face come up to capture more light so it won't be so dark and red. All right, let's go back. Alrighty, so skin tone, I think her tones are beautiful. There's obviously a lot of things that you can do here to improve the overall tonality throughout the image in terms of an even tone. Here her hand is quite light and it's a little cooler than obviously her arm and so on, but the baby's got quite a bit of red. So I would do exactly what I did with the previous image on the blue background. That's a mouthful. I'd use my lightened skin reds and then reduce skin reds more in some of these sort of darker areas here around the baby's face. Mum's skin on her face is just beautiful. I'd probably just cool down her arms, and they do look a little yellow, and the baby's got a little bit of jaundice you can see around the face there. So yeah, I would just come into some of those sort of warmer areas, and what are we at, 24, and just cool them down to match the rest. I wouldn't necessarily warm it up, but I would get the tone right first and then start to work in some of those other areas in terms of lighten and darken. But when a hand is quite bright like this, sometimes it can be too bright and hard to actually bring down because there's not a lot of information there. When I was talking about, you know, darker areas of images when there's not a lot of information, when part of an image is too bright, there's not going to be a lot of information there to work with. So sometimes you might have to use some sorcery. It's not a very technical term, but I'll show you in a second. All right, so just bringing those the yellows in the arms down a little bit is already starting to even it out there. All right, so again, we'll just do the face very quickly just to show you, and then I'll wrap it up. It's probably very late where a lot of you are.
Well, we've still got lots of people watching, so unless they've fallen asleep, maybe, because it's so late. But we're still over 100 people.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I do love editing, and this is the first time I have picked up my Wacom pen since December. Early December. So you can see just going over here, making a difference there, trying to get it a little more even. I would continue to do that to get it just right, but what I want to show you really quickly is just how to darken down some areas where there's not a lot of information, and to have a quick look here. You know, that hand is really sort of quite bright there. It's not too bad, but it's a lot brighter than anywhere else. And sometimes there's not a lot of, especially when the hand is up like that, there's not a lot of blood flow going through the hand when it's in that position, especially with the elbow bent like that, upright above the heart. So you can sometimes often look a lot brighter with the light hitting it because of that lack of blood flow through the hand. So what I would do is actually I'm going to sample the skin first, so just normal background. Holding the Option key in, I'm just going to sample that area. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go solid color. If I wanted to, this is where I could warm it up or cool it down, but just to show you very quickly, I'm going to multiply that information. I'm going to click on my mask and I'm going to invert it, and now I'm going to paint it on at a low opacity. And this is where I find I'm always trying to draw the viewer's eye into the main subject, which is going to be the baby and the mum. So removing any brighter areas that take your eye away from their faces is what I'm focused on, because it's all about keeping that connection with whoever's looking at the image. But yeah, that's it. I'm done. Whew.
Amazing. Well,
I hope thank you for those that sent those photos in. Another quick thing here, composition wise, there's a lot of negative space off to the left hand side of the frame, so I would kind of position her a little tighter in the frame and either in the center there like that. But obviously, any negative space that you do have within the image needs to be balanced, or it needs to be used in terms of the direction that they're either facing or turning, so that you don't have any useless information there. That's the easiest way for me to explain it right now.
Lovely. Well, lots of people are saying what time it is where they are. 1 a.m. in London.
Oh, wow.
And then we've got 3 a.m. in Cyprus.
Yeah, thank you again to those that have sent their images in. It is hard, obviously, having, there's the original image. So yeah, just be careful there with some of those highlights around the face and the knees and the joints, because they are really quite bright. So you don't need to have, the highlights too bright on the top of the nose and things like that. You don't need to increase it when it comes to dodging and burning. So try to keep it a little more even and try to draw the focus into both of their faces. Alrighty, that's what I was saying. When you do see images in the group and you might want to think that it's okay to edit someone else's photo, please remember that it's a rule of the group that you don't just take someone else's photo and change it on them without asking and their permission, because that's their photo, and it's always best just to try and give feedback where feedback is asked. But yeah, please don't edit someone else's photo without them asking. But I've been wanting to do this for a while, and I get asked, obviously, what to do in certain situations, and it's been a really good exercise to show you what you can do. But I can't emphasize enough how important it really is to get your photos right in camera, because I've been sitting here now, for an hour and 7 minutes, and just going through some of the really quick, what I call quick ways to edit mistakes that could have been improved in camera. There were quite a few other images that were added to the post that I shared yesterday, but I figured that this selection of images kind of addressed a lot of the issues that were in the other photos. But please remember, be patient with yourself. Learning to use a camera, learning to use Photoshop is one thing. That's the technical side of being a photographer. But then when it comes to working with your clients, working with babies, that's another thing. So I know we can't shoot like we normally can. I think in the UK you can go back to work in April. That's what they're saying in terms of lockdown. I know that in the US you are working, but there are places where people aren't working, and that is the best time right now for you to perfect your camera skills. It's a craft, and your camera is your tool, and you need to know how to use it. So every time you pick it up to take a photo of a baby, your focus and attention will be on the baby and not wondering whether or not you got the exposure right. And then you don't have to sit in front of a computer with your back to your family, or wasting time not doing other things that you should be doing, like marketing your business or spending time with your loved ones, doing other things. It's all about time. Everything is about time. The time that you put into this, the time that you put into learning and growing, and the time that you can then put back into different areas of your business that would be better spent. So please value your time. It took me a long time to value mine, and I lost 3 years basically. I think it was about 3 years of telling my kids, I'm nearly done, I'm nearly finished. because I wasted so much of my time. But that's why I emphasize that so much now, because I don't want anyone to waste their time like I did. So learn from my mistakes, and you'll see some really great results. But thank you for watching. There's so many of you. I'll go back through and have a read of the comments shortly. But have a great weekend. Make sure you join us back here again next Thursday for another live. We are going live every Thursday, and you'll find videos that we've done previously on my YouTube channel, so make sure you check those out as well. But take care, stay safe, and I'll see you soon. Bye.